The heavy electronic collar around Vex's neck hissed, the red light pulsing like a dying star. Kalen didn't flinch as the Myrmidon lunged, her makeshift shiv grazing his throat. He dropped to his knees, not in a plea for mercy, but to offer her the small silver electronic key. If you want to see how a gladiator turns a death sentence into a revolution, subscribe to our chronicle before the guards realize what's happening. Now, let's see how we got to this edge. 12 days earlier, the sour smell of recycled sweat and ionized blood had been the only thing Kalen could taste. The Zylok blood pit was a jagged wound in the planet's crust, lined with thousands of screaming spectators. From my perch in the observation booth, I watched Kalen. As a junior logistics clerk for the Dominion, it was my job to record the spoils, but my eyes rarely left the Terran. He was a whirlwind of practiced efficiency, dodging the forearm champion's overhead strike before driving a serrated blade through its primary chest cavity. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar that preceded it. Overlord Zarkon descended from the high dais, his chitinous armor clicking with every step. He didn't offer a medal, he offered lives. 2 women were dragged into the dust Vex, a Myrmidon warrior with eyes like cold flint, and Alara, an Orion whose skin shimmered with a faint, dying bioluminescence. They were bound in heavy metal chains that scraped against the stone, a sound that seemed to make Kalen's jaw set into a hard, ceramic line. I recorded the transaction on my datapad, 2 biological units, awarded for combat excellence. But Kalen didn't reach for the lead chains. He stepped back, his voice amplified by the pit's acoustics. He told the Overlord that the Dominion's laws were stagnant, that he didn't want slaves, and that the reward was an insult to a true warrior. I felt the air grow cold. To reject a gift from Zarkon was to invite the disintegrator beam. The guards leveled their rifles. Kalen looked directly at the High Overlord and shouted that he had something better than a victory. He had the encryption codes for the Terran Vanguard's border nebula. The execution halted. Within the hour, I was processing the flight manifest for a surveillance-rigged scout ship. Kalen was to deliver the intel, using the 2 females as physical proof of his defection. As they boarded, Vex's heavy metal chains caught on the airlock hatch, sparking against the frame. Kalen didn't help her. He watched her with a mask of calculated indifference that even fooled the internal sensors. 3 hours into the flight, the ship settled into a steady hum, while the Dominion's remote cameras tracked his every move on the bridge. Kalen slipped into the galley to prepare a ration pack, his movements stiff, as if he knew the Overlord's finger was hovering over the remote detonation switch. The tension on that ship is thick enough to choke a vacuum. If you're ready to see the mask slip, subscribe to follow the rest of the voyage. We're just getting to the dangerous part. Kalen moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of a man walking through a minefield. From my monitoring station back on the Zylok homeworld, I watched the thermal feed of the cargo hold. The Terran wasn't just navigating, he was dismantling. Every time he passed a junction box, a wire was subtly rerouted. Every time he checked the captives, his shadow blocked the lens for a fraction of a second too long. He reached for the heavy metal chains pinning Alara to the bulkhead. To the Overlord watching from the throne, it looked like a routine inspection of the cargo's integrity. To me, noting the way his fingers blurred against the magnetic locks, it looked like a countdown. He wasn't tightening the bonds, he was thinning the signal that held them shut. The ship groaned as it hit the gravity well of the neutral zone. Kalen retreated to the hold, away from the primary bridge cameras. I saw Vex shift in the darkness, her silhouette sharpening like a blade, and then the lunge. The Myrmidon's shiv was an inch from his pulse point. Kalen didn't fight back. He didn't use the combat training that had turned the pit into a graveyard. He simply knelt. He held out the silver key, his eyes steady even as the red light of the surveillance suite blinked overhead like a predatory eye. Vex froze. The metal chains hit the deck with a muffled clang that sounded like a bell tolling for the Dominion. In that silence, Kalen whispered the coordinates for the Terran Vanguard intercept point. He wasn't a defector. He was the lighthouse. A Terran strike cruiser dropped from warp, its massive hull eclipsing the stars. I watched the communication logs bloom with false data encrypted intel that was actually a Trojan horse designed to collapse the Xyloc defense grid from the inside. While Alara and Vex spoke to the Terran captain in the secure bay, testifying to the truth of their captor's soul, Kalen stayed on the bridge. He looked into the camera, knowing the Overlord was watching, and smiled. 3 months later, the Xyloc Dominion was a memory of ash and signed treaties. I stood in the gallery of the Cosmic Assembly, no longer a clerk for an empire, but a witness for a new age. Zarkon sat in the center of the hall. He was no longer draped in chitinous gold. His wrists were bound, forced to endure the weight of the very heavy metal chains that had once belonged to Vex. Kalen stood at the balcony, watching as the man who dealt in lives was finally measured by his own cruelty. The same links that once signified a prize now held a prisoner. If you want to see what happens when the hunters become the hunted in tomorrow's Chronicle, subscribe and join the vanguard. What would you sacrifice to tear down an empire from the inside?